Some relationships don't end with goodbye. They end with distance. There are certain people who don't end the relationship on their own. So instead of leaving directly, some people consciously wait for the other person to make the final decision. They want to leave, but they don't want to leave first. And sometimes the shift is so subtle that you barely notice it in the beginning. At first, everything still looks normal on the surface. The conversations still happen. The relationship technically still exists, but emotionally, something already started changing underneath it. So instead of saying they're unhappy, they slowly become distant. Replies get colder, effort gets smaller, small arguments appear more often. Or maybe the excuses quietly start appearing too. Sorry, I was busy. I fell asleep in the afternoon. I didn't see your call. And at first you try not to overthink it. You tell yourself maybe they're stressed. Maybe life has just become overwhelming lately. Maybe they're emotionally exhausted. Maybe you're simply imagining the distance because you care too much. Because when you love someone, your mind naturally searches for explanations that hurt less. Not always because they want to hurt you. Sometimes because ending a relationship feels emotionally heavier than staying in one. Sometimes people aren't avoiding the relationship. They're avoiding becoming the villain in their own story. So instead of ending the relationship themselves, they slowly become distant and quietly hope you'll be the one who leaves. And most people never notice this while it's happening, because nothing looks dramatic at first. There's no big moment, no obvious ending, no sentence that clearly says, I'm done. Just small things. The good morning texts slowly disappear. The conversations that once felt effortless suddenly start feeling heavier. Phone calls become shorter. The excitement disappears from their voice. You begin rereading messages wondering if you're imagining things. Affection changes in small ways that are hard to explain. And the strangest part is that nobody says anything out loud. But somehow, you can feel that something between you doesn't feel the same anymore. You start noticing tiny pauses, tiny emotional absences, tiny changes in energy that are impossible to prove, but impossible to ignore. And that confusion can become exhausting because human beings struggle with uncertainty more than rejection itself. A clear ending hurts, but ambiguity slowly drains you from the inside. You keep wondering, are they losing feelings? Did something happen? Am I overthinking? Should I ask again? Am I becoming needy? And slowly the relationship stops feeling safe. It starts feeling like emotional guesswork. And from the outside, this behavior often gets misunderstood. People see someone becoming distant and immediately assume they stopped caring, or they assume the person is manipulative or emotionally immature. But human behavior is usually quieter and more complicated than that. Psychologists who study relationships have noticed something interesting. People don't only protect relationships. Sometimes they protect the story they get to tell themselves afterward. Because breakups don't only create heartbreak, they create responsibility. And responsibility can be uncomfortable. Because if you leave someone directly, you have to sit with certain thoughts. I hurt this person. I gave up. I ended it. I was the reason this fell apart. And for some people, carrying that feels heavier than people realize. Because most people want to believe something about themselves. That they're caring, that they're loyal, that they're the kind of person who doesn't hurt people. We all carry private identities inside our heads. Little stories about who we are, and usually, we protect those stories more than we realize. Because memories don't just preserve what happened. People unconsciously rewrite them in ways that make emotional pain easier to carry. Not necessarily by lying, not necessarily on purpose, but by slowly reshaping events into versions that feel easier to live with. And if the other person leaves first, something changes. Now the story becomes, it didn't work because they gave up. They walked away. They stopped trying. I didn't end it. And suddenly the emotional weight shifts. The guilt feels smaller, the responsibility feels lighter, because now they don't have to become the person who caused the ending. And psychologically, that can feel safer. Not because people are always trying to manipulate someone. Most of the time, it's much quieter than that. Human beings naturally protect themselves from guilt, shame, and blame. We all want to believe we're good people. We all want our actions to fit the story we already have about ourselves. So sometimes the mind unconsciously searches for a middle ground. Not staying, not leaving. Just slowly creating distance. Replies get slower. Warmth becomes inconsistent. Effort changes. Plans stop feeling certain. The emotional presence slowly fades before the person physically leaves, and eventually the relationship starts feeling like it ended by itself. Until one person finally says, maybe we should end this. And suddenly they never had to become the villain. Because from their perspective, they didn't leave. The relationship simply ended. But there's a strange paradox hidden inside all of this. Trying to avoid guilt doesn't remove pain. Sometimes it only transfers it, because someone still sits awake wondering what changed. Someone still rereads old conversations trying to find the moment things felt different. Someone still blames themselves for a silence they never created. Someone still wonders, was it something I did? Did I miss something? Was I not enough? And those questions can stay in someone's mind for months, sometimes even years, because unclear endings don't always create closure. Sometimes they create obsession. The mind keeps searching for answers because it never received a clean ending to process. And that's the part people rarely talk about. What looks distant on the outside doesn't always come from a lack of feeling. Sometimes it comes from fear. Fear of guilt. Fear of blame. Fear of confrontation. Fear of hurting someone directly. Fear of becoming the villain in a story they never wanted to tell. So if you've ever recognized this pattern in someone, or quietly recognized it in yourself, maybe it makes more sense than it first seemed. Because sometimes people aren't avoiding relationships. They're avoiding responsibility for the ending. And sometimes those are two very different things.